Congressional Testimony, Reexamining the Economic Costs of Debt by L. Randall Wray. Section 2. Federal Government Deficits and Debt. While politicians and commentators tend to talk about the federal government deficit as if it's abnormal and a problem that needs to be solved, a federal deficit has been the norm for at least the past century. Figure 2 shows the federal budgetary outcome, deficit or surplus, with the deficit as a negative number, as a percent of GDP since 1930. There are several striking features worth noticing. First, the budget deficit reached above 25% of GDP during World War II, and then rebounded to nearly a 5% surplus when the war ended. After that, the deficit moved in an increasingly countercyclical manner, with the budget moving toward a surplus before each recession, shaded areas, and then turning sharply to deficit in the downturn. After the mid-1950s, surpluses virtually disappear until the second half of the 1990s. That is, over the past 70 years, deficits have become the norm, and they have increased on trend relative to GDP. Even the long recovery and expansion phase that followed the global financial crisis, GFC, has not been able to produce a budget surplus, as the deficit only fell to about 2.5% of GDP before rising even in the continuing expansion phase after 2015. Figure 3 shows the post-1970 outstanding federal government debt as a percent of GDP, with the exception of the second half of the 1990s. The ratio has consistently risen because debt has grown faster than GDP. Note that these deficit and debt outcomes are not due to runaway government spending, which has been relatively flat, as discussed in the first section. However, as Table 1 shows, this is not an entirely new phenomenon. Footnote 3. This table is borrowed from T1, 2019. End footnote. Even over the period 1791 to 1930, the debt-to-GDP ratio grew on average at a rate of 0.31% per year. Since 1931, it has grown at a rate of 4.22% per year, for an average of 1.82% over the entire period. What has changed is the pace of growth. As T1 2019 shows, until the 1930s, the main cause of more rapid growth was war, and this was also true in World War II, of course. But since 1931, the debt ratio fell in only 5 years, while it rose in 83 years. Although a growing debt ratio is normal as a long-term trend, what changed after World War II is that there are few years in which the ratio falls.